Podcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon or good morning from wherever you are in the country and participating. I want to thank everybody for attending this webinar. My name's Ed Hartman. I'm DAV's Inspector General, and we wanted to provide this opportunity to discuss the annual financial reporting procedures, as many of you in your responsibilities as the department treasurer and or chapter treasurer seem to have many questions throughout the course of the process of completing your annual financial report. So we wanted to have this webinar to maybe try to address some of those, be a little proactive and assisting each and every one of you in completing your annual financial reports this year. I did note that there were some individuals that had registered for this webinar that indicated that they were from the auxiliary. Keep in mind, this is a DAV specific form that we're going to be discussing today. The DAV auxiliary has their own unique annual financial report, so this information shared today will likely not be to the benefit of anybody attending and participating as a member of the auxiliary. Each and every year, we all know that as department and chapter leaders, and particularly the treasurer, we receive the annual financial report kit from national headquarters. It does look like a very complicated and cumbersome document with a lot of information and some attachments. It really is a very simple document to complete, and so this webinar will kind of serve as a Cliff's Note variation, if you will, or interpretation of all of the instructions and schedules that accompany the annual financial report. One of the things that I always like to have the opportunity to do is just remind DAV chapter leaders all the time that the funds that we get as an organization at all levels are provided by the general public to support DAV's free programs of service to ill and injured veterans and their families, for which we are known. Of course, when we talk about the programs of service that we're known for, I'm talking about our Chapter Department and National Service Officer Program, our DAV Transportation Network, VAVS programs, legislative programs, employment programs, so on and so forth. Those programs that are very unique and very specific to DAV. So it's our responsibility, our fiduciary responsibility at all levels, whether it be a chapter, department, or the national organization, to apply those funds that are donated to us from the general public to be used primarily for those DAV programs of service. So we all know that the filing requirements for DAV entities are due within 90 days at the end of the accounting period, which is September 30th. For DAV's purposes, the accounting period is always July 1st through June 30th of the following year. So right now, at this point in time, if you haven't already, all DAV entities should be working on their annual financial report for year-end June 30th, 2019. All departments are required to submit an annual financial report to the national organization. All chapters are required to provide an AFR to the department, and departments are absolutely responsible for evaluating and reviewing the chapter annual financial reports. Those chapters that during the course of the accounting year have more than $10,000 of gross income for that year must also file an annual financial report with the national organization. Now, we did have a resolution that came up from a department this year that might change that $10,000 figure to $25,000, which we hope will be favorably considered by the convention coming up So that will require many chapters who are otherwise right now required to provide a report to national to no longer do so. Any and all entities that have more than $300,000 of income during the course of the year, in addition to providing their annual financial report, must also submit a CPA review along with their AFR. So when you take a look at the annual financial report, that long legal size document, legal size page document, it's really broken down into three very unique sections. The very first section is has to deal with the income. The second or middle part of the form deals with all expenditures, lines 11 through 21. And then finally, the last section of the AFR is a section which allows the chapter of the department to reflect all the total liquid assets that it has. We will go through each of these unique sections line by line and provide examples of what information and what documentation would need to be submitted to accompany the annual financial report for each of those lines. Looking at the very first section of the annual financial report, line 1 simply requires and asks for the total number of membership dues per capita that either the chapter received or the department received from the national organization. Line number 2 is very specific to forget-me-not income. And again, we're looking for the gross total of what was collected during the forget-me-not efforts of the chapter or the department through the year. And when I say gross total there, on this line, we cannot back out any expenses that we have associated with the forget-me-not drive, because that's going to be reported and included in another line under expenditures associated with forget-me-not drive. Line 3, 4, and 5 are specific to income that comes in from any bingo program, thrift store operation, or bar lounge operation. And again, this is dealing with gross total income. So before any bills are paid, that would be the amount that would be reflected for each of those lines, 3 through 5, as it relates to bingo, thrift store, bar, and bar lounge operations. Line 6 is income and interest from checking, savings, and CDs only, certificates of deposits. We have another section a little bit later on that's going to deal with investment portfolio income. So again, line 6 is just income from interest solely from checking accounts, savings accounts, and or certificates of deposits. Line number 7 is primarily for departments only, and this would include any and all funding from the national organization, and this would include anything that comes through the department from the state service program that we provide to departments and or Columbia Trust grants that are provided to the department. There may be an occasion where a chapter would have an amount to be reflected on this line, because there are a very few handful of chapters that have applied for and received grants from the Columbia Trust for very unique and specific programs. So that is the information that we're looking for on line 7 in total. Line number 8, as promised, is information reflecting any profits from any investment portfolios that the department or a chapter may have. And line number 9 is any and all other income that is not otherwise addressed in lines 1 through 8. This would include total amounts from grants received, bequests that were received, or general donations received from the public or through members. And there will be a schedule that would be required to reflect and break down what each one of those are for, which we will get to momentarily here. And then simply line number 10 is just totaling up all of the income from lines 1 through 9 and reflecting that value on line number 10. When we talk, the only line item that requires a schedule in the income sample, as I just mentioned, is that related to line number 9, other income. And a general listing is acceptable. This can simply just be a Word document outlining that the chapter received a bequest from an estate in the amount of $10,000, a grant from a County Veterans Service Commission, donations from members during chapter meetings, and you'll most notably on here, you'll see I used here as an example of a donation of a power wheelchair. That's very important to note because, of course, we have to report income for in-kind donations of product or wheelchairs, durable medical goods, things of that nature. So anytime that the chapter receives anything of value from the public, we have to recognize that gift to the donor, and then, of course, report it as an asset or income for the chapter. And a little bit later, I'll provide you an example of how that amount that you see listed there as a donation of a power wheelchair will be reflected as an expenditure when we get into the expenses. Moving on, the second section of the annual financial report is the expenses portion. And so if we look at the annual financial report, we'll see that on line number 11, it asks for administrative salaries, taxes, and benefits. And as you'll see there, a schedule will be required. And of course, we'll get to an example of that after we cover all of these line items here as to what that schedule can consist of and what it might look like. Administrative salaries, taxes, everything on line 7 is usually very typical or specific to a department, as many chapters obviously do not have paid employees of the chapter operating that would justify an expense noted on line number 11. Line number 12 is all expenses associated with members or leaders' participation in conventions and conferences for travel, lodging, meals, and again, we'll get into an example of what a schedule might look like, and it can be a general schedule. We will get to that here momentarily. Line number 13 is all of the expenses associated with postage and office supplies, such things as sending out newsletters, buying business cards for leaders of the chapter, etc. Line number 14, which is the most very important expense line noted on the annual financial report. And that is the line specific to all of our expenses that were dedicated to service and charitable work, and it will be very form specific. So in the packets that are received from the national organization by departments and chapters each and every year, there's a service schedule that is provided, which further goes into detail of what expenditures were included for line number 14. And we will again get into a sample of what items and what things we're looking for on line 14. And it should be noted again, as I mentioned previously, that this is the most important line on the expense annual financial report section, because of course, as a nonprofit veteran service organization, we're obligated to spend our donors' money for our federally chartered purpose. So a great percentage, a good majority of the funds that we expend on an annual basis really ought to be reflected in line number 14. Line number 15, as we mentioned previously in the income, chapters and those departments that do conduct forget-me-not drives may have expenses associated with their forget-me-not drives, whether that includes buying supplies such as the forget-me-not flowers, posters to promote the forget-me-not drive, collection buckets, canisters, things of that nature. So that is where the amount of expenses would be reflected on those costs associated with your forget-me-not drives. Line number 16, there are a handful of chapters and maybe even a department or two out there that conduct bingo operations. Line number 16 is the location for to report any and all bingo expenses associated with their bingo operation, such as salaries, taxes, and of course winnings payouts to winners at bingo. And of course there will be a schedule required. It's a general schedule, and again we will provide an example of what that would look like here in a few short moments. Line number 17, any chapter thrift store expenses, including salaries. And again, we will get into an example of what the schedule would look like and what kind of information should be reflected on that schedule. But again, these are expenses directly related to the operation of any thrift store. Fortunately, we only have a handful of chapters and departments that have thrift store operations in existence. And whenever I say fortunately, that's because in those instances, those are programs that are generating revenue and are actually bringing in income to support our service programs. Those that were in the thrift store business previously found that they were losing money, and obviously at that point were no longer a valid fundraising activity of the chapter or the department, and had since gone away. So, and likewise on line number 18, any bar expenses that a chapter may have associated with its chapter operation, the expenses associated with that, including salaries, would be reported on line 18, and of course a schedule would be required for that, and I will provide a sample schedule that you can use to help you with reporting on those again, handful of chapters that do have bar lounge operations associated with their chapters. Let's see, line number 19, chapter or department property expenses. So any chapter, any department that owns property or has property that it leases or rents for the conducting of its business, any and all expenses associated with that property or building would be reported on line number 19. So things such as maintenance, utilities, insurance, etc. And again, we will get into an example of what a schedule may look like to accompany line number 19. Line number 20, again, remember up top we were talking about with the income. Any income that was received as a result of an investment portfolio that the chapter or the department might have. Likewise, if your investment portfolio lost money during the course of the year, that loss would be reflected on line number 20. Line number 21 is any and all other expenses, and of course this is a very broad category. And we will get into some examples of what items might be included in terms of all other expenses, and we'll provide you a sample schedule and what that might look like. And finally, for line number 22 of expenses, it's simply the culmination of all the expenses combined from lines 11 through 21. So here's an example of, on line 11, of course, that requires a schedule to be provided along with it. And again, it can just be a very simple general Word document that outlines that the department had payroll expenses to the adjutant in the amount of $40,000, payroll taxes for that individual would be included. Any employee benefits that were associated with that individual would be included. And then also for any administrative staff that the department and/or in some cases a chapter might have on the payroll. Now keep in mind this is for administrative salary. So if the department or chapter had employees that were associated with a thrift store operation, a bingo operation, or a bar lounge operation, that would not be included under the salaries listed for line number 11. And in addition to payroll taxes, employee benefits, any and all other costs associated with an employment of an individual for the operation of the administration side would be also included under line 11, and also would be further noted on the schedule required for line 11. Line number 12, again, that's referring to expenses associated with conventions and conferences. And again, a general listing is acceptable. So again, it can just simply be a Word document that says for line number 12, we had expenses for the chapter commander to attend department convention in the amount of $800. We had expenses for the chapter commander to attend national convention in the amount of $1,200. And again, that's just an example. Keep in mind that since this is titled Conventions and Conferences and Seminars on line 12, keep in mind that if you have a chapter service officer or department service officer that is participating in the CSO DSO certification annually at the department convention, any costs associated with their attendance at that seminar or that conference for training would not be listed as a convention or conference expense because they are there getting information, getting certification. As a chapter service officer, we can reflect that as a direct service expenditure, which would be later reported under line 14 and the schedule associated with that. We will get to a sample of that here in just a few moments. Line number 14, a sample of what a schedule might look like for line number 14. And again, a general listing is acceptable, and this has to do with postage and supplies. So an example would be the chapter had an expense of $40 for the purchase of a digital voice recorder to assist the adjutant in recording the minutes of the meetings, something along those lines. Inkjet printer cartridges of $25, copying paper $15. Anything that's associated with postage and supplies for the chapter would be listed on line 13 and further described in a general schedule for line number 13. Line number 14. Now here's the big one. As I mentioned earlier, this is the line that should have a bulk of expenditures for chapters and departments. And this is also the line that has a separate and unique schedule that is provided along with the annual financial report that must be completed along with the annual financial report. So items that will be listed and included as service and charitable will be items such as donations to VA medical centers, donations or financial support of VABS programs, national transportation van grant programs. So therefore, if your chapter or the department provides funding to purchase a new van for the DAV transportation network, that would certainly be a service expenditure. Service programs, that is where we were talking about this is when you have a very unique and specific service program that you offer in your community that otherwise isn't mentioned specifically as a DAV recognized service program, like our Transportation Network DAVS program, something along those lines. Service officer salaries and benefits. This primarily pertains to departments that employ department service officers. We would need to have a breakdown of the salaries and benefits associated with the employment of those individuals. Cost to attend service school. So again, we were mentioning previously that if you have expenses for your CSO, your DSOs to attend the certification at department convention, that would certainly be listed as a service expenditure and not otherwise to be reported under the general conventions and conferences portion of the annual financial report. Any expenses to or any contributions to HSC salaries and their benefits. Columbia Trust donations would also be listed as a expense under line 14. National Service Foundation donation, LVAP program expenses, and donations to state veterans homes, any housing programs that the chapter or department may have contributed to or be involved with, any meal programs, publications that educate our members on DAV related activities or legislative activities that are beneficial and would provide a service would be listed as a service expense under line 14. Any grants to homeless or needy veterans and or any other charitable givings of the chapter. And if you recall, when we were talking about income and other income in section number 1, we talked about the gifts of in-kind products or durable medical goods such as a power wheelchair. So if the chapter received a $1,000, the value of $1,000 for a power wheelchair that was given to the chapter to provide to a homeless or needy veteran rather, when the chapter makes that donation to a veteran, that is where that amount would be listed as a service expenditure for the chapter. So when we look at the actual service and charitable expense schedule, which accompanies the annual financial report, it's very unique. It's very specific. It asks for information, and there's a reason for which that we ask that information that we'll get into here towards the end of the presentation. Further down the expenses section of the annual financial report, line number 16 through 18 has to deal with bingo operations, thrift store operations, and bar lounge operations. And again, a general listing is acceptable. And so line number 16, as it deals with bingo, the schedule would outline the fact that we paid out as a chapter, or in the case of a department, $100,000 of prizes to bingo winners. We employed a bingo manager for $10,000 to operate that program. Those would be all included under the schedule for the expenses associated with line 16. Same thing for line 17, thrift store manager salary, thrift store employee salaries, benefits, anything else that has to do with the employment or the operation of a thrift store would need to be noted in that general accounting schedule for expenses associated with line number 17. The same holds true for line 18. If the chapter has a bar lounge operation, that is where line 18 is where all of the funds, the expenses associated with that are. So the schedule would look like something to the effect of what bartender was paid as a salary, or bartenders, because I'm sure that you probably have more than one bartender. The total amount paid to the bartenders, costs associated with product of beer, wine, liquor purchases, snacks, whatever the case might be, any expenditure listed or associated with the bar lounge would need to be included on that schedule. On line number 19, of course, there's a schedule that is required for that line as well. And again, a general listing is certainly acceptable. And this is for, again, chapters or departments that own property, have a building, either own it, lease it, rent it, whatever the case might be. Any and all expenses associated with that would be listed under the schedule for that. So an example, utilities for the year, $1,500, insurance for the property, $900. Any repairs that were made to the property would be reflected there. Lawn care, exterior landscaping, if the chapter or the department needed to provide or purchase new chairs for the meetings, security monitoring fees, new carpet, exterior painting, you name it, anything that the chapter had as an expenditure or an expense associated with the ownership, lease, or renting of meeting space would be reflected in the schedule for line number 19. Line number 20, and again, these are the other expenses that are associated with the chapter or the department. An example would be if your chapter typically purchases pizza or provides a meal to the members attending the chapter meeting. If the chapter or the department hosts an entertainment and provides a meal during the holidays. If the chapter or the department provides a meal or a luncheon or a recognition ceremony or celebration for volunteers, that is where all of the examples of expenditures would be listed for line number 20. And again, just a simple Word document outlining what the expenses were and the total amount of the expenses for each of those items. So the line number 23 talks about total liquid assets. So when we talk about liquid assets, we're talking about anything and everything that the chapter or the department might own, either in a checking account, a savings account, CDs, investment portfolios, so on and so forth. And it's very important to note that a statement, a current statement, be provided along with the annual financial report for each and every one of these accounts. So if the chapter or the department has a checking account, the total amount at the year end of June 30th would be reflected on that line, plus any nominal cash on hand that might be maintained by the chapter or the department. A copy of the most recent bank statement ending June 30th of the accounting period would need to accompany that for line 23. Line number 24, if you have a savings account, that balance should be reflected on line 24. And again, a year-end June 30th bank statement should accompany the annual financial report reflecting the amount maintained in the savings account. Any CDs that are owned by a chapter or department should be reflected on line 25, and of course a copy of the June 30th statement for that CD or any number of CDs that the department or chapter may have, and a copy of the June 30th statement of the market value of any and all investment portfolios that the department or chapter must have. And of course line number 27 is simply totaling lines 23 through 26. The very end of the annual financial report just asks for an other assets schedule. So if we talked about, or we talked previously, if the department or a chapter owns any real estate or any property, we're simply asking for the address of the property, when the property was purchased, and the current market value of the property. If the department or the chapter has any loans against the department or chapter for building improvement or whatever the case might be, that loan balance should be reflected, and the information specific to the financial institution would also be included on that line as well. Furniture and equipment, simply a brief description, an estimated value of whatever that furniture and equipment might be, whether it's laptop computers, printers, large electric devices that are owned by the chapter, would be listed as furniture and equipment. Vehicles, if the department or a chapter owns a vehicle, I know that there are many departments that have a vehicle that they make available for use by the department commander throughout the course of their year as department commander. That is where the information would be conveyed in terms of assets of the department. We simply are asking for the year, make, model, and the estimated value of the vehicle that's owned by the department, and in some cases by the chapter. Miscellaneous, a brief description and estimated value. Now, miscellaneous is really just, it's anything that is not covered in real estate, loans, furniture and equipment, or vehicles. So for those of you out there that have Picassos hanging in your chapter halls or in your department buildings, or have Rolex watches laying around or fur coats laying around, that's where that information would be included and calculated for miscellaneous. That's the information that we're looking for. So again, anything that is an other asset outside of cash, outside of real estate, loans, furniture and equipment, vehicles, would be recorded under miscellaneous. So each and every year we talk about the importance of filing these annual financial reports. Why is it essential? First and foremost, we need to have, as a chapter, as a department, and as a national organization, we have to have a complete accounting of our funding, because of course we have an obligation to our donors to provide information should they so request on what we are doing with their money, or with our money. But I always refer to it as their money, because of course anything and everything that we get from the general public comes in the form of a donation to DAV at all levels. So I commonly refer to it as their money. DAV is just a steward of maintaining and holding those finances and applying them towards programs specific to DAV's federally chartered purpose. We need to have a complete accounting of expenses and distributions throughout the course of the year. And as I mentioned at least 2 times already, being a nonprofit veteran service organization, we have an obligation to spend our money on DAV service programs for which we are known. Of course, DAV is coming up on our 100-year anniversary, and we have survived that long as a nonprofit veteran service organization simply because the general public believes in our mission. They continue to support us because they see the fruits of their donations. They see the fact that DAV provides funding to those programs for which we have come to be known for. Our DSO, CSO, our National Service Officer Program, our Transition Service Officer Program, the DAV Transportation Network, the ABS programs, anything and everything. So we really need to, if we have not done so already, ensure that as a chapter, as a department, a majority of our expenses that are reflected on our annual financial report show up on line number 14. Because again, at the end of the day, all of the funding that we receive comes from the general public, and we really ought to focus our efforts on funding DAV specific programs. Proper record keeping and documentation. This should really be done throughout the course of the year. It's an ongoing exercise, primarily so that we as members, when we come to our chapter meetings, we know what we're doing as an organization, what money came in, what money went out, what it went out for, and certainly it makes it so much easier for the treasurer and the audit committee at the end of the year in the preparation of the annual financial report to have at that time all of the documentation at their disposal to fully complete and provide the information necessary for the submittal of the annual financial report. We really need to support, again, I mention this again simply because, again, people donate to DAV because they believe in our mission. Supporting DAV's mission versus other organizations. There's certainly nothing wrong with a DAV chapter or department supporting a program being hosted by another veterans organization or another organization, so long as that program is very specific to our federally chartered purpose of providing services, free programs of services to ill and injured veterans and their families. So even though our chapter or department might be providing some funding to another organization for a program that is going to benefit our demographic of constituents, you know, there's certainly nothing wrong with that, but we really ought to be focusing on supporting our very unique programs of service to veterans and their families. Annual financial reports are due 90 days at the end of the closing year, and of course we all know that the financial year ends June 30th, so by September 30th, annual financial reports would need to be provided to the appropriate receiving entity, and as I mentioned previously, all chapters need to provide a copy to their appropriate department. All departments would need to have provided a copy of their financial report to the national organization, and any chapter that currently at this moment had more than $10,000 of income during the prior year, in addition to filing a report with the department, would also in turn file an annual financial report with the national organization. But as I mentioned previously, I'm very hopeful that a resolution that was submitted will increase that minimum amount to $25,000, which would likely result in most chapters only being required to provide an annual financial report to their department. As the national organization, it's our responsibility to ensure that finances of the organization at all levels are being provided in accordance with our federal charter. Each and every department, each and every chapter in our organization is under DAV National's group exemption number. So as the parent of that group exemption number, it's our responsibility to ensure an accurate and full accounting of funding for all chapters and all departments. At this time, as I promised and mentioned previously to many of you, we will have the opportunity to address a few questions. Those of you that have logged on and are participating, if you'll notice on the Go to Webinar box, about 3/4 of the way down that box, you will see a chat link. If you click on that chat link, the down arrow, that will open up a window for you to type a message, and you can certainly present any questions that you might have that I haven't already addressed, or if you need further clarification on something that I mentioned, you can certainly type your message there, send it to me, and I'd be happy to address it. And I noticed that there have been a few folks that have already identified that chat feature and have sent in a few questions already. So let me just try to get to those here real quick, while others might be composing their questions to be sent to me. Received the question, why do we need to provide detailed information for veterans we provide grants to on the service charitable expense schedule? And they're referring to the schedule that is provided along with the annual financial report to list all of the expenditures for line 14 on the annual financial report. One of the very last portions of that schedule asks for the listing of grants made to homeless or needy veterans, and it also asks for the attachment of a schedule by name and amount granted. And of course, it's in the best interest of DAV at any and all levels to know where our funds are being provided in an effort to fully understand the needs of each chapter and their chapter's communities, and also probably more importantly, to have a method to validate the claimed expenditures of a chapter or a department. So information that we're looking for there is simply we provided $500 to John Jones to pay his rent for the month, or we provided $1,000 to replace the transmission of Sarah Jones. And again, we don't need to go into detail in terms of, or that great of a detail in terms of information from the veteran that we are assisting. Just their name, the amount granted, and what the grant was for would be sufficient. Have another question here. Why is it important to list donated goods such as wheelchairs or other items that we receive on our AFR? Well, that's actually a very good question, and probably most importantly is we must always give credit to our donors for any gifts that they provide to DAV, whether it be cash or donated items that we can otherwise accept and in turn turn around and provide to a disabled veteran or their family. So that's probably first and foremost why it's most important. So if we give credit to an entity for providing a donated item to DAV, we have to reflect that on our books as income, and then of course we have to reflect the expenditure once we donate that item to a veteran or their family. So we have to acknowledge their gift for their tax purposes, obviously. Likewise, when we provide or when a donated item is provided to DAV, such as a power wheelchair, that has a monetary value associated with it that the donor can use for their own tax purposes. Remember, we should and must also fully report everything that is service related in order to fully take credit for our efforts as a chapter or as a department for our good works in the community. So unless you account for it as income and unless you include it as an expenditure on line number 14, nobody's going to have any idea that the chapter is receiving these kinds of donated goods and in turn making those donations to needy veterans or their families in the community. Let's see, next question here. Question is, why are we required to provide recognition letters from donations we make to VA and state veterans homes? again, it's a matter of validating donations made by chapters and departments, and really to help keep everyone honest. More importantly, it's a matter of good record keeping and being able to justify expenditures to the members of the chapter. And also members of the audit committee should also be looking for this information during their audit of the chapter or the department's annual financial reports each and every year. As just like DAB does at all levels, at the chapter level, the department, and the national level, if we receive a monetary donation, if we receive a donation of a durable medical good or something, we have to provide a recognition letter to that donor noting their donation for tax purposes. Just like our responsibility is the responsibility of the VA or a state veterans nursing home to recognize the gifts that we provide as an organization. So if the chapter makes a $1,000 donation to VA Medical Center for a new television for the rec room, the VA is obligated to in turn recognize that gift to DAB, and further that just simply validates what is being reported on the annual financial report, that the chapter did in fact make a $1,000 donation to the VA Medical Center. Let's see, next question here, this one just came in. Can we provide a copy of a canceled check if we don't get a letter from VA? I'm assuming that that's associated with the issue that we just addressed. If the chapter or the department does not receive a recognition letter from the chapter, from the VA or the state veterans nursing home, certainly we would accept a copy of a canceled check showing or validating the issuance of a donation to whether it be a VA medical center or a state veterans nursing home. So that would certainly be acceptable as well. This next question that came in, can we make donations to other organizations? As I mentioned previously, it all depends. If the donation is being made to support DAB's federally chartered purpose of serving ill and injured veterans and their dependents by way of supporting a particular program, then yes, we certainly can. What we cannot do is provide general donations to other organizations, be it other veterans service organizations or otherwise. We always have to be able to justify to our donors that we're good stewards of the funds that they provide to DAB at all levels. And so that being said, again, we have an obligation to spend our donors' money on their intended programs of service. And that being said, it should be related to our service programs, our VABS programs, our DAB Transportation Network program, our Transition Service Officer programs, our special events and activities programs like the Winter Sports Clinic, the National Veterans Tea Tournament that we're involved in. The only time that it would be acceptable to, as I mentioned previously, make a donation, and I'll just give an example maybe to help clarify it a little bit. Let's just say that there's another service organization in town that is hosting a homeless veterans stand down, and that other organization has come to DAB and asked for a $5,000 donation to provide meals or provide purchasing socks or toiletry items for the stand down. That would be an absolute that would absolutely be fine to support and provide the donation to that other service organization specific for that purpose. We oftentimes see on annual financial reports and cringe often where donations have been made to other organizations just as a general donation. And unfortunately, many of these organizations, these other nonprofit organizations that the funding is being provided to by way of a grant or donation from a chapter or department, have absolutely nothing to do with veterans. Many times we see donations to the local police fraternity or the local firefighters union or the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, churches. Again, these are organizations that have absolutely nothing to do with our federally chartered purpose, and the quickest way to lose the support of our very generous donors in the communities at all levels would be to have it be made known public that DAV is making donations to organizations other than to support programs of service to disabled veterans and their families, because the mindset is, in the donor's perspective anyway, is if I wanted my money to be given to a church, if I wanted my money to go to the firefighters union or the local police fraternal order of police, I would have given my donation directly to them. I didn't. I wanted it to go to DAV to further support DAV's mission of providing free programs of service to ill and injured veterans and their families. So I hope that helps clarify that issue. At this time, I don't have any other questions that have come in. However, if there are some questions that you have that either you didn't want to ask publicly via the webinar, certainly feel free to email your question to me at ehartman@dav.org, and I will work for the next several days in replying to each and every one of those questions that you may or may not have. Certainly, as always, do not hesitate to reach out to me or April Pierce here at our national headquarters if we can assist you in the completion of your annual financial reports while you're actually in the progress of completing them. We certainly want to ensure that when you're completing them, you're providing accurate information the first time, so that when you submit it to the department, it's accurate, it's correct. When you're submitting it to the national organization, it's accurate and correct, and all the information is there that's required, so we don't have to come back to the chapter later or come back to the department later and ask for further supporting documentation or otherwise. So again, I want to, I hope this information was useful to you. I want to thank each and every one of you for your time and your commitment to DAV and your interest in this topic. And I will certainly see you in Orlando for those of you that are attending our national convention coming up here in just a few short weeks. If you are headed that way, safe travels, and we will see you in Orlando. Again, thank you for participating.